This is gonna be tough. Okay, let's go. Star Wars: Rise of Skywalker. Um, so first things first. I'm not going to spoil anything in the review. The only thing I will mention is things we already saw in the trailers and things that are mentioned in the opening crawl that sets up the story of the film, as is tradition in a Star Wars movie. I think that's fair game. And the next 5 minutes of the film after that, in order to give you at least a rough idea of what the movie is actually about. Now, I won't rant also about the background and my expectations of the film again. I made a separate video about that a few days ago, which I will link in the description. Just know that my expectations were rather low, and the unfortunate truth is that I was still disappointed. Disappointed and frustrated and just defeated, I guess. The absolute shortest version of the review is that Rise of Skywalker is not a good film on its own, and it's a terrible Star Wars film. So let's actually start with the good stuff. The list is short. The music, made by John Williams, is fantastic as always. Adam Driver and Oscar Isaac are both great to see on the screen, and they make the best they can with the script that they are given, especially Driver. His Kylo Ren definitely remains my favorite part of the entire new trilogy, by far. His dynamic with Rey is also once again done in a cool way, although by the end of it, it did unfortunately feel like we're just doing the same thing over and over that we did in Last Jedi already, which is, he tries to convince her to join him. She almost considers it, then backs away at the last moment, and they fight. Rinse and repeat. And finally, Ian McDiarmid, who returns as Emperor Palpatine, is having the time of his life, and he clearly doesn't let the fact that he's in a bad movie stop him from having an absolute blast with the role. And that pretty much covers it. Now, for the problems. Rise of Skywalker had a monumentally difficult job of following two movies that didn't really work too well together because, surprise, they were not planned as a whole trilogy at the beginning. Force Awakens set up a number of mysteries, and then Last Jedi threw all of them away. Now, in Episode 9, it's very clear that J.J. Abrams, coming back again, has tried as hard as he could to salvage some of those destroyed mysteries, to have something that he could go on. So we do get some information about Snoke. We go back to the subplot about Rey's parents. The Knights of Ren finally show up. Problem is that Abrams had to essentially rebuild those mysteries, set up his plot, and resolve all of that over the course of one movie. And that doesn't lead to anything good, to be honest. Even such a simple thing as setting up the story for the film. So we knew from the trailers that Palpatine would be returning in some capacity, but at least I assumed that there would be some mystery to him, that he would be teased throughout the film and only revealed towards the end, or even not at all as a fake out. But then we have the opening crawl, which just outright states, I'm not joking, that Palpatine is alive and he wants to return to power, and it is known in the universe from a radio broadcast that of his voice that he released throughout the galaxy. Now, Kylo Ren is trying to find him, and meanwhile, Rey is training her powers, and the Resistance keeps working against the First Order. That's basically the opening crawl. And by the way, that broadcast thing, I initially thought it was weird that it was just mentioned, but never actually heard or shown on screen, because it never is. Because I think we can all agree that if you're trying to bring back the biggest villain of the series, then maybe mentioning that he announced himself is not the best way to do it, to reintroduce him. Maybe they should have played the recording somewhere, like at the end of the previous movie, at the beginning of this one, to tease us of what's to come. Maybe in the trailers, I don't know, but there was nothing. Or so I thought, because today I went on the internet and I found out that there is a video game called Fortnite, and that game occasionally has tie-in limited time events related to various movies or other franchises, and they had one for Star Wars not so long ago, and this recording of Palpatine was actually played there, and that was, I think, the first confirmation that he was actually alive. Now, think for a second how insane that all sounds. you have what is essentially the intro to this fucking icon of a villain, and you don't show it in the film, you don't show it in the trailers, you show it in a video game for only a specific time, and then there's no other way to view it other than the players recording it for YouTube, which is how I saw it. Madness. So you're thinking, okay, maybe the way they introduce the idea of Palpatine is weird and comes out of nowhere, but at least Kylo will have this epic mission to find him, and probably at some point he and Rey will maybe race who gets there first. That's what I imagine the plot would be like. Well, not really, because in the first 5 minutes of the film, Kylo reaches the Emperor, and he's just shown there, and he gives us some exposition, which honestly creates more questions than it answers. He reveals his new powerful fleet, again, comes absolutely out of fucking nowhere, and sends Kylo on his merry way to find Rey. And I'm sitting there thinking, really? That's it? This is everything? That's no build-up, no anticipation, just dump the Emperor on the screen right away, and that's it? Fuck me, this is not a good sign. And remember, this is the first 5 minutes of the film. So then the actual plot starts with, as I mentioned, Rey and the gang trying to also find Palpatine and kill him, and Kylo trying to find them. And what it comes down to is essentially zapping around various different planets in this mad rush. Oh, we have to find this object on this planet. It will then lead us to another object on another planet, and then we have to find this person on this planet. It just goes zing, zing, zing from one place to another, from one plot point to another, and it has no room to breathe, no time to explore anything. It's very poorly written. It's this very poorly written linear quest that is a pretext to keep the action up. But the problem is that the action itself is not thrilling enough to keep me engaged. And as a trade-off, we lose a whole lot of the world building. And remember, world building is essential to Star Wars. Think of the original trilogy, how many shots we had back then of just environments, places, even characters within them, just being there, letting us breathe in the atmosphere. Hell, even Force Awakens had echoes of that, especially in the first act on Jakku when we meet Rey. Remember those shots of the crashed Imperial cruiser, or whatever that was? There was just seconds of no dialogue, no action, nothing happening, just for us to be in the world. There's nothing of that here. So meanwhile, Rise of Skywalker is just instead super exhausting because of this zapping around, and because there's so many different elements and objects that the gang has to find, and it feels like because there's so many of them that none of them really truly is important, so there's no feeling of stakes being high. And speaking of stakes, there are two things that I want to mention. There are multiple times in the film where something happens and I was like, okay, this is actually bold. This is an action or an event that will have far-reaching consequences for a change. This is cool. I'm now emotionally engaged because of it. And almost immediately after, the film goes, no, actually, not really. And that whole thing is reversed. And it turns out it didn't matter at all. And of course, I can't spoil exactly what happens. There are several different things. But being extremely vague, at least one of those is related to the well-being of a certain character. So you have that gasp when that well-being is not only threatened, but straight up damaged. But 5 minutes later, it turns out that everything is fine. And then it happens multiple times. In fact, there's only one time, I think, that it doesn't end up being a fake out. So at some point, you're wondering, why should I care? Clearly, none of this matters. The filmmakers are cowards, and nothing of consequence is permanent. So why would I be invested? Another reason why it's hard to be invested is the character of Rey. Just to underline, I have nothing against Daisy Ridley, okay? Or her acting. I think she's totally fine. I'm speaking purely about the character and how it's written. And even back in Force Awakens, I was admitting, I had this little criticism about the film, that she is a bit of a Mary Sue. She's apparently very good at everything she does. Can fly ships, can repair ships, can scavenge, can fight, is compassionate, easily make friends, is strong in the Force, picks up the lightsaber quickly. She's just very good at everything she touches. But back then I thought, okay, alright, this is the first film, there are ways to go with her. But Rise of Skywalker takes that to a whole other level. Rey is now a walking plot device. Every time there's a problem, regardless of the type of the problem, she is the solution. Using one skill or another, she just beats every obstacle on her way without any problem or hesitation or conflict. Contrast that with Luke for a second from the original trilogy. What made him so compelling a character was that he had to learn from his failures. He frequently loses his fights and he has to learn to pick himself back up again. Rey is the opposite of that, okay? She's perfect in every respect, and that makes her unbelievably bland. And at some point, you begin to wonder, maybe even invincible. Maybe there's some kind of plot armor to her. I feel like Disney was going for a cool female protagonist, which in itself would be fine, but they failed to grasp the most elementary lesson of character writing, and it's that characters without flaws are not interesting at all, or realistic for that matter. There's a comparison to be made here to the currently ongoing TV series in the Star Wars universe called The Mandalorian. It's available on Disney Plus, which is absolutely excellent, by the way, in every respect. I have previously described to my friends that watching that show is like watching someone play a role-playing video game. They have these different missions, which consist of several various tasks to be performed. There's shooting and fighting, but there's also strategy and planning involved. The hero is not unbeatable, and over the course of the show, you can see him leveling up, so to speak, getting better equipment, getting new skills, getting new knowledge. Watching Rise of Skywalker, to compare it, is like watching someone play a video game as well, but this time with cheat codes. Anytime there's a problem, Rey will just use one of her force powers that previously we had no idea about, and just get it done in 2 seconds. It doesn't make for very good storytelling, and it makes it difficult to even treat the story seriously. There comes a moment when you have to stop and think about it and begin to wonder what it is you're watching. For me, that moment came in rather unexpectedly during a lightsaber duel scene. Again, I think this isn't the spoiler because we saw it in the trailer, and come on, even if you didn't watch any trailers, you all knew that at some point Kylo would fight Rey, okay? So they do end up in a fight at one point, and I'm watching it, and suddenly I find that I'm not thinking about this particular fight. I'm going back in my mind to Luke versus Vader in Return of the Jedi, to Duel of the Fates in Phantom Menace, to Anakin versus Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith. I'm thinking back, and I'm wondering, how is it that all of those previous duels were every single one of them was so gripping and spectacular and important that I remember them now instead of focusing on the current scene. And the answer is not the cinematography or the choreography or the special effects or anything like that. It comes down to stakes, to the fact that by this point in the film, I've been in Rise of Skywalker, I have been conditioned already to think that I shouldn't be invested, and so I am not. And that was an awful realization. If you told me as a kid that I would one day be bored while watching an epic lightsaber duel in a new Star Wars film, I would think you're crazy, but here we are. And going back to the stakes again, it's even weirder if you think of the scale of the plot. After all, we have Palpatine coming back, we have this new deadly fleet, and without going too much in detail, basically the whole galaxy is at stake. It hangs in the balance, the lives of everybody. The scale of the spectacle has been raised to the level that we haven't reached before in Star Wars. And yet again, I'm not engaged. Because however grandiose you go with the macro scale, if you don't make me invested personally in the characters for the small stuff, then it's all for naught. It's all hollow and empty. And another thing that the movie does is it tries to emulate Avengers Endgame in a way. So if you've seen that film, you know that it was a kind of a victory lap of all the previous MCU films. There were multiple callbacks to what we've seen before, some just visual, some in terms of dialogue. And let's be fair, they were in no way subtle. The movie made a point of having us know what it's referencing. But despite that, within the context of the film, I think it still felt pretty seamless. I don't think there was a single one of those references or parallels where I went, okay, this is too much. Rise of Skywalker tries to follow that formula, but honestly, in this regard, it looks like Endgame's poor, retarded brother. The callbacks and visual references and repeated lines are mostly embarrassing, and instead of feeling like a natural way of bringing the nostalgia and the memories to life, they instead feel cheap. It's like Abrams going, look, see this? You know what this is? Yeah, this is the thing that was in that previous movie. Of course you know, but well, in case you don't, just to be safe, we're going to also spell it out for you in the dialogue. Wink, wink. And then, all right, next planet, next action sequence, next reference. And at some point you want to say, stop it. It's not fun. It's clunky and unnecessary, and honestly, it's even a little dishonest to me to rely so much on the familiar things when Last Jedi made it a point and went to so much distance to bury them all, to bury the past. And also, on topic of references, this is going to seem like a minor thing, but bear with me because it actually is very telling. So, as we establish in the first 5 minutes, the only way to find Palpatine is to use this gizmo, this special star map for Force users created by the Sith. It is a small object, looks like it's part glass and part metal, and you interact with it using the Force. Now, that's very convenient then, you may think if you're a fan, because we already have such objects well established in the books and games and the animated series. They are called holocrons and have been used by the Jedi and the Sith for millennia. Nice little way to reference that expanded universe and use what you already have, right? Except not. Because for some reason, the movie never uses the word holocron and instead introduces a separate new term for this object, calling it a Sith Wayfinder. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, come on, this is small scale nerd stuff. It doesn't matter. And yeah, it kind of is, but it shows the approach of the filmmakers really clearly. In a movie that relies so heavily on referencing the previous material, you have all those heavy-handed callbacks, those low-hanging fruits all taken care of. But when it comes to something just a little bit more obscure, then it's like none of the previous Star Wars media exists. It shows that Abrams and the rest of the filmmakers were not really going for the callbacks in order to appease the fans, really. They did it because it was easy. It also stands in stark contrast to the series I already mentioned, The Mandalorian. So in The Mandalorian, in pretty much every episode, we have multiple references to the established universe, but most of them are really subtle and unobtrusive. Sometimes they are not even spoken of. It's like there will be a specific type of droid or alien just being shown in a scene in the background, and I don't even pick up on all of them. I just go later to the forums and see, hardcore fans basically getting very excited about it because, for example, it is a specific droid that showed up in a cartoon once and could only be found on specific planets filling a specific role, and it perfectly matches what is going on in the episode. So it shows a completely different approach and attention to detail and respect to detail that is not shoved in our face at every corner, but is there because it should be, or at least because it could be and it fits. It shows again this massive respect to the wealth of Star Wars media that exists, something that was lacking in a new film. Back to the film though, the final thing I wanted to mention was the ending. Without saying what happens, I think a lot of it spits in the face of the previous two trilogies and things that they accomplished. The more you think about it, the more you analyze those elements, the less sense it makes. It just renders a lot of the crucial plot elements from the previous films meaningless for no good reason at all. And right after the climax, there's a scene which is meant to be emotional, let's say, for lack of a better word. And when it happens, the audience around me groaned and laughed. And that's not a reaction you were going for. That shows something isn't working here, or rather, nothing is. It is definitely the first Star Wars movie that made me feel utterly defeated. Say what you will about Last Jedi, even though I ultimately didn't like it, and I think it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny at all. I remember that right after walking out of the theater, I knew my mind wasn't made up. I knew it was an excellent film in pure visual terms, and it did manage to take me in the moment. Even now, going back to it, I can very clearly see some of the shots. Rey in the Hall of Mirrors, throne room fight, Lightspeed suicide, of course, the duel between Luke and Kylo, Luke's death. Rise of Skywalker is even blander in this respect. It's very pedestrian. I think the only thing I really liked in terms of the visuals were the scenes with Emperor Palpatine. The location of them is properly atmospheric, and they do this fun thing with lightning constantly flickering, going on and off on his face, which looks amazing and scary and creepy and fits the themes. But outside of that one little thing, there's nothing that I think I will remember about it. And so, without even the visuals to cling on to, I knew immediately after the film that it was a catastrophe, that I felt bad having watched it, and that I much rather prefer that it didn't exist in the first place. And saying that as a lifelong fan of Star Wars makes me incredibly sad. There is one last thing actually, and this, for a change, it will be a massive spoiler because it says what happens in the last scene of the film. So if you haven't watched it and don't want to know, close the window, come back later. We good? Okay. So at the very end, Rey travels to Tatooine and finds the original house of Luke Skywalker. And immediately as she landed the ship, I thought, oh no. Because I realized the only iconic element they haven't yet bastardized in this film was the binary sunset, which is my favorite scene in the entire history of Star Wars, by the way. It's that short scene from A New Hope. I think it's less than a minute long. I will link it in the description as well, where Luke buries his uncle and aunt after they've been killed, and then he steps outside the house and looks out into the horizon with the twin suns of Tatooine setting. And there are no words spoken, but you can see on his face all those emotions. The realization that his old life is over now and that he is about to embark on this unknown adventure with Obi-Wan Kenobi. An adventure that he doesn't know where it'll lead him, could very well be to his death. So he takes that one last final look at the twin suns that he grew up under, and the music swells at that moment. And I swear to fuck, it's one of the most terrific shots in the history of cinema. So simple, so powerful, and because of the two suns, so unique and recognizable by everyone. So Rey, going back to Rise of Skywalker, so Rey lands there and I'm thinking, shit, please tell me that they wouldn't dare copy that shot with Rey instead of Luke, because she has not earned it. She hasn't gone through the same journey that he had. The filmmakers haven't earned it, for God's sake. You don't get to finish on that. You just don't. But then I see the sky is actually cloudy, so I have this moment of relief. No suns, so no violation incoming. And then there's a short scene and a bit of final dialogue, and at the last moment, the clouds part, and Rey says her final line, and the twin suns are there. And what do you fucking know? The music plays and the movie ends on the shot of Rey and the binary sunset. Roll credits. And I know that this sounds like a bit like a Star Wars nerd gatekeeping people and getting angry that someone did something that he didn't like to one particular scene. And to an extent it is. But I guess the fact is that I have this deep love of cinema, okay, and of sci-fi, and the roots of both those types of love do trace back to Star Wars. The movies that I watched as a small kid that pushed my imagination and curiosity about the world and space, that had partly inspired me to create my own worlds, to write, that I paid homage to in one of the short stories that I wrote a few years back. And seeing these movies end up becoming a caricature of themselves and shamelessly stealing even that one pure moment that I thought was untouchable is honestly heartbreaking. I can't help but feel that that kid, that 5-year-old Star Wars fan that lived somewhere here inside of me, died a little yesterday, and I don't want him to.